All right, the NFL Network has rated the top 100 players, and I think when you get into ratings like that, Jake, and maybe you can help me out on this, that sometimes they come up with the answer first and then they work their way back to it. Am I correct that that possibly happens sometimes?
I would think that you're absolutely correct. So it's just tough because those things are so subjective. They rely on player ratings, and sometimes players can vote for their friends and things of that
Right.
nature. So I know that Myles Garrett came 49, Baker came 50, and Odell Beckham came 23rd. It was just a matter of those guys are within the positions. I think they rank players within the positions, and then they sort of let them tier out based on who's the most dominant within their position. So it doesn't surprise me where the Browns are ranked. It's great for them to have 4 players in the top 100. It's been a significant amount of time since they've had that. But they're arbitrary ratings. Doesn't mean the players don't pay attention to them. I know Myles Garrett was pretty vocal on Twitter about this is the lowest he'll ever be in the coming years. And I do expect that the top 3 names there are names that could absolutely jump up the list too. And Jarvis-Landry could have a bounce back year. The Browns are going to probably use him in a more effective way, closer to the line of scrimmage, allow him to flourish in what he's most comfortable with now that he has a number 1 receiver next to him, as instead of being forced those number 1 downfield targets.
Right.
So that all 4 of those names could absolutely jump up that list.
All right, first of all, you make a great point that players vote for their friends and don't even know, especially if it's an offensive lineman, as an example. They don't even know they don't even know if the guy played that week, but they vote each other in. But also, there's something arbitrary about which is the most important position. Obviously, quarterback is the most important position, but you're not going to have all quarterbacks ranked in the top 25. So what do you think most emphasis, without having that whole list in front of us, where should the emphasis be besides quarterback?
That's a great question. I think that you probably see too many names at the skill positions ranked higher there because those are the guys who get the most publicity. They're the ones who score the touchdowns. Like you said, the quarterbacks are throwing those touchdowns. But there should be offensive linemen are in such a scarcity in today's game in terms of really quality offensive linemen. I think that more and more teams are putting out from the college level to the pros really dominant defensive linemen who are understanding how to use long length, those guys like Myles Garrett, Khalil Mack, Von Miller across the NFL, and you don't have enough quality linemen that are able to combat those guys and give quarterbacks a lot of time. So in my opinion, the one that is consistently underrated offensive line that should always be higher because the amount of skill and the amount of beating those guys take on an every snap basis is pretty wild, and I don't think the average fan understands that.
All right, help me out on this. You talk about the lineman as an example. If you get your quarterback, whether it's Baker Mayfield or somebody from some other team, and they are taught to unload the ball quickly, so it's a quick drop and a quick pass. Sometimes, as long as he stays clean and doesn't have his pants dirty and doesn't take hits or take sacks, sometimes the rating of that offensive lineman may go up when it may not be deserved.
That's a great point. And one of the things that some of the statistic collection sites, such as Pro Football Focus and the likes of Sports Info Solutions, they're really trying to quantify. And ESPN's doing their own win-loss metric between offensive linemen and saying we're going to study each offensive lineman on an individual basis and look at whether he won or lost his matchup against a certain player he's going up against. So you're right. There are times where, for example, Chris Hubbard at right tackle could just get blown past, but Baker Mayfield's able to step up, slide out of the pocket, and nothing comes of it. It's not a sack. It may be a pressure that is recorded as a statistic, but it's not a sack. And sometimes those metrics are tough to quantify. So you're right. The scheme plays into it. How the coaches, such as Freddie Kitchens, did a fantastic job in the second half of last year, giving his tight ends and running backs more help for his tackles that were struggling. It all ties in together, and usually it's going to say the best offenses in the NFL are going to have the best offensive lines because the scheme ties up with the blocking that's going on effectively and the ball's coming out fast. So it's a collection. I think when you look at offensive line and sack statistics across the league, you have to say how much of it is on the quarterback, how much of it is on the playmaker or the play caller, and then how much of it is on the offensive line. There's a real balance that has to happen there, and if you just look at one stat and try to blame the offensive line, that's a dangerous thing.
Jake Burns is here from cleveland.com. He's the film room correspondent. All right, there's a whole bunch of reasons I want this season to get underway, not the least of which is we can get rid of these rankings because as far as I'm concerned, once the first ball is snapped or kicked off, they don't mean anything.
Oh, yeah. I mean, absolutely. I think that, like, I tried to rank the Browns and the rest of the AFC North and all different tiers of positions, and it's like I feel like when I added all of those things up, the Browns have the best roster on paper. If you add up and tally points, if you get a 4-point total for first place, third for second, all the way down the line, and you add those up. But it's like, at the end of the day, it's going to be a little bit of skill and a little bit of luck too. Less like it's going to be the Browns have had a really clean bill of health the past, at least in 2018, where they stayed really healthy. They kept most of their primary players healthy all year. You just don't know. Some teams get depleted by injuries. If you look at the Bengals last year, they lost numerous players along the offensive line. Then they lost Andy Dalton, and then they lost AJ Green. It's just like you have to hope that your team stays healthy. Sometimes you play teams at the right time of year. It's a lot of things that go into this, and it's not just which teams look better on paper. It's which teams are healthy at the right time of year, are clicking on the highest cylinder at the right time of year when they're playing somebody else, and then you sort of look at that 16-game sample size and say, these are the best teams that came out of it. But it's not always the most talented team on paper because we spend 6-7 months talking about it, and then it changes, like you said, when the first ball snapped.
Yeah, it's a war of attrition, and you got to just hang in there, and the longer you do, or the more you can stay away from the injuries, the better off you're going to be. Let's take a look again at you talked about the top 100 players. 4 of the Browns are on the list. Odell Beckham, 23rd. Why so low?
Well, I think it's because of the injury history of late. I think he's had a couple seasons here. 2017, he missed some time with injury, and then he missed the last 4 games of 2018. And something we're going to talk about here in a little bit, Les, is he is not, or was not, I should say was, playing with the best quarterback that could accentuate his skill set. So I think the league really respects him to be inside the top 25, but when you consider the injuries he's dealt with the last 2 years that held him out of 4 games last year, multiple games in 2017 to begin the year. If you recall, he hurt his ankle in Cleveland Browns, their First Energy Stadium there in 2017 preseason. You add those things up, and the quarterback that he was trying to combat, it means that he's probably not as respected as he could be, and why some people think he's a favorite to break out and lead multiple wide receiver categories.
All right, so you go to NFL Network's 49th best top player is Myles Garrett, and then you come back with the quarterback in Baker Mayfield at 50th. So they're 49th and 50th. Are they bunched up about where they should be?
I feel like Myles is pretty fair going into year 3. He had a pretty strong rookie season when he came back from that injury, and then had a very strong second year. He kind of faded down the stretch, I thought, when they were playing him too many snaps. But I do feel like he's a top 50 player, and he's one that has potential, if he has an 18 to 20 sack year, to jump into the top 15 going into next year. Now, Baker Mayfield probably a little higher on this list than I thought he would come in after just his rookie season. But I think what's going on there is people are evaluating his rookie year, saying he had to overcome the loss of a head coach and offensive coordinator, and only played in 13 and a half games, and didn't have many reps in preseason and camp with the first team, but was still able to set the single-season touchdown mark. I think people are very, very high on coordinator, head coach, and then obviously he's going to have a much more explosive group of weapons around him. So I think there's a little bit of forecasting and people looking at the right statistics from his rookie year. But it's nice for Browns fans to have a quarterback who's respected across the league like this.
No question about it. The only problem is there may be a book on him now that they didn't have last year. Now they could spend the offseason working on it. So we'll see how it plays in when he has to combat that himself and maybe change some of his ways instead of what he did last year.